The high desert stretched for miles, its sand shimmering like broken glass beneath the noon sun. Wind hissed through the sage and whispered against the bleached bones of fallen cattle. Out there, nothing lived long unless it was mean, fast, or blessed by luck. Colt Rayner had never been lucky. He was a man carved from dust and regret, a drifter whose boots had crossed more graves than towns. That morning, he'd been following a dry arroyo toward Dust Creek, hoping to find a trickle of water and a patch of shade before nightfall. Then his horse snorted, ears flicking toward the wash. Colt pulled the reins and scanned the shimmering heat. Something was moving down there, small, uneven, human. He slid from the saddle, his rifle in one hand. The air smelled of iron and sage. A few steps closer and he saw her. She was lying half buried in sand and shadow, one arm flung across her chest. Her dress was torn buckskin, the color of earth. Her dark hair tangled with dust. The lower part of her leg was swollen tight as a knotted rope. Just below the knee, 2 punctures gleamed angry red. "Snakebite," Colt muttered. The woman's lips trembled and a faint whisper came. Words in Apache, rough and desperate. He didn't understand, but he didn't need to. He dropped to his knees beside her. The air around the wound pulsed with heat. The skin was already turning black around the edges. He pulled his knife, slit the fabric above the bite, and without hesitating pressed his mouth to the wound. Bitter venom filled his tongue and he spat hard into the sand. Again and again until the bleeding slowed and his own head began to swim. When it was done, he rinsed his mouth with the last of his water and bound her leg with a strip torn from his sleeve. Her eyes fluttered open, deep brown, sharp even through fever. "Why?" she managed. He looked down at her, panting, sweat streaking the dust on his face. "Guess I was tired of watching things die out here." She tried to move, but the pain twisted through her body like lightning. He steadied her shoulders, voice low. "Easy now." The sun was dropping fast, the light turning red. Colt glanced at the horizon. Dust Creek was half a day's ride behind him, but he remembered an old line shack maybe 10 miles west, 4 walls and a roof. If the storms hadn't taken it. He lifted her carefully, her body weight light but trembling. The horse shifted under them as he settled her in front of him. Her head fell against his chest. He could feel her breath flutter like a bird against his ribs. They rode through the dying light. Coyotes called from the ridges, their cries long and lonely. The woman drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes murmuring in her language, sometimes silent as stone. Colt kept his arm tight around her to keep her steady, his eyes fixed on the dark line of hills ahead. Night came quick. The wind turned cold. When he finally spotted the shack, leaning against the side of a low mesa, it felt almost unreal, like a memory. He tied the horse beneath the overhang, kicked open the warped door, and carried her inside. The room smelled of dust and old smoke. He laid her on the cot, covered her with his blanket, and lit a small fire from scraps of mesquite. The flame caught slow, then steady, painting her face in gold and shadow. She was young, maybe 20, maybe less. But there was pride in her features, the kind that didn't break easy. Colt sat beside the fire, watching the color drain back into her cheeks. Outside, the wind howled across the mesa like a living thing. Inside, the cabin creaked but held. Colt leaned back against the wall, exhaustion washing over him. He'd meant only to ride through this country, to leave no trace. But now he'd found a life hanging by a thread, and, against his better judgment, tied his fate to it. He looked once more at the sleeping woman and whispered to himself, "Reckon tomorrow's going to be a different kind of day." The cabin at the edge of the mesa had stood through more winters than anyone could count. Its walls were dry and splintered, its roof patched with tin that rattled in the wind. But for that one night, it was enough to hold 2 lives together between fever and fire. Colt Rayner poured a trickle of water from his canteen into a rusted tin cup. He knelt beside the cot where the Apache woman lay. Her breathing was shallow, her skin slick with sweat. The snake's poison still burned in her blood, creeping upward with every heartbeat. He lifted her head carefully and pressed the cup to her lips. "Drink slow," he murmured. She swallowed, eyes fluttering open, dazed and half lost in delirium. Words tumbled from her tongue, not English but full of fear and memory. "I don't understand," Colt said softly. "But you're safe here." Her gaze darted around the room, confused, mistrusting. She tried to sit, but pain shot through her leg and she gasped. Colt steadied her gently, keeping her from tearing the bandage. Lie still. You move, you'll make it worse. He turned to the fire, poured whiskey from a flask into a dented tin, and mixed it with ground willow bark from his saddlebag. It wasn't medicine, but it might cool the fever. He spooned it into her mouth in small sips, then watched her eyelids droop again. Hours passed. Outside, the wind scraped against the walls, whispering like ghosts of the old wars that had scorched this land. Colt fed the fire until the cabin glowed with soft orange light. He leaned back in the chair, exhaustion pulling at him, eyes tracing her face, the sharp line of her cheekbones, the dried blood along her temple, the stubborn strength that hadn't given up even as the desert tried to claim her. He wondered what she'd been running from. When dawn came, the fire was down to embers. Her breathing had eased, steadier now. Colt took a breath of relief he didn't realize he'd been holding. The first words she spoke were rough but clear. "You help me." "Guess so. Why?" He looked at her, then away. "I don't rightly know. Maybe I was just tired of burying things." She blinked at him, a flicker of understanding, maybe gratitude, maybe disbelief. "You risked life. For me? Would have been hard to ride away. No, and I left you for the buzzards." The faintest trace of a smile touched her lips before she drifted back into sleep. By afternoon, she woke again, clearer now. Colt was outside chopping dead mesquite for firewood. She tried to rise, winced, and sank back onto the cot. Her gaze wandered the cabin, the saddle in the corner, the tin plates on the shelf, the gun leaning against the wall. Everything in here told the story of a man living too long with silence. When Colt came back in, she watched him quietly. "Your name?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Colt Rayner." "I am Sahani," she said, each syllable soft but sure. He nodded. "Suits you." She frowned, not sure if he'd complimented her or simply spoken truth. They didn't talk much that day. Words felt heavy, unnecessary. She ate a few spoonfuls of beans he warmed by the fire, then dozed again. Colt sat near the doorway, watching the sky turn from gold to violet, thinking about how strange it was. Two strangers bound together by chance, neither knowing what tomorrow might ask of them. When night fell again, the fever returned, but milder this time. Colt sat beside her once more, dabbing cool water on her forehead. In the stillness, he spoke softly, not sure she could hear. "Had a wife once. Long time ago. Fever took her too. I couldn't stop it then." His eyes fell to her bandaged leg. "Maybe I can now." Outside, coyotes called from the ridge, their voices carrying through the darkness like a prayer and a warning. Inside, the fire burned low but steady, the only light between two lost souls trying to find their way back to something like life. Morning came slow, pushing the chill out of the cabin plank by plank. The desert beyond was still. No birds, no breeze, just silence heavy enough to hear your own heartbeat. Colt Rayner stirred the embers in the stove and poured coffee grounds into a dented pot. He'd slept in the chair again, gun still resting across his lap. The Apache woman, Sahani, was awake, her eyes following him with quiet wariness. She spoke first. "You not soldier?" Colt looked over. "Not anymore." "Then what are you?" He hesitated, poured 2 tin cups of coffee, though she'd never asked for one. "A man who's seen too much and kept too little." She took the cup but didn't drink, just held it, letting the steam warm her fingers. Her leg was still bandaged, swelling eased a little. "You fight against us," she said finally. He met her gaze. "Once fought for somebody else's war. Didn't know what side was right till there weren't any left." Silence settled again, broken only by the creak of old boards in the wind. Sahani studied him, the deep lines at his eyes, the scar running from his jaw to his neck. "You kill many men?" Colt's jaw tightened. "Enough that I quit counting." She nodded as if that answer made sense. "And now you hide," he smirked faintly. "Something like that." For a while neither spoke. Colt cleaned his rifle while Sahani dozed, her hand resting lightly over the bandaged leg. He couldn't help but notice how her breathing had steadied, strong again, steady as the land itself. Later that day she asked for water and tried to stand. He caught her before she fell, and for the first time she let him hold her without flinching. "Easy," he said. "Ain't no race to run." "I must go soon," she said through clenched teeth. "You go out there now, you'll die," he said flatly. "Snake bites the least of it. The desert eats what it finds." She gave a hard look, proud and distant. "My people will think I am dead," he nodded. Maybe that's safer for you. Her eyes narrowed. You think I fear? Colt leaned back against the wall, crossing his arms. I think you don't know how much danger's left in this country. Men hunt what they don't understand. That made her pause. You mean bounty men? Yeah. I heard talk back in town. Apache girl escaped from a raid north of the ridge. White ranchers put a price on her, called it justice. Sahani's lips pressed tight. They kill my brother. Burn our home. I run. Her voice cracked for the first time, barely more than a whisper. Colt said nothing. He knew too well what loss sounded like. The kind that didn't end when the fire went out. When evening came, she managed to hobble outside with his help. The horizon glowed red over the hills, the sky awash of copper and violet. Coyotes called from far off, their cries weaving through the fading light. Pretty sight, Colt said softly. Sahani looked at the sky. In my tongue, she said, we call that our tsuno, the spirit's light. It means those we lose walk ahead of us, showing the way. He nodded, eyes distant. I reckon I got a few ghosts of my own walking out there. Sahani glanced at him, something shifting behind her steady gaze. You not run from them? He gave a tired smile. I tried. But ghosts don't tire easy. They stood there until the last light bled from the sky. For the first time since he'd found her, the silence between them wasn't made of fear or mistrust. It was something quieter. Something like understanding. When they went back inside, Colt noticed she was limping less. The firelight caught in her hair, and for a moment he saw her not as a wounded fugitive, but as a person still fighting to live. He poured the last of the coffee and handed her the cup. You'll be walking again soon. She took it, her voice calm but certain. I will need to. Colt frowned slightly. What's that mean? Before she could answer, a sound cut through the wind, faint, distant, metallic. The clatter of horseshoes on stone. They froze, both turning toward the window. Riders. 3, maybe 4. Moving slow through the valley below. Colt's face hardened. Looks like word traveled faster than we did. The sound came again, the dull clink of iron on rock, closer now, carried by the evening wind. Colt Rayner moved to the window, easing one shutter open with 2 fingers. 3 riders, maybe 4, fanning out across the valley below. They weren't moving fast, but they weren't lost either. The front rider wore a dark coat and carried his rifle slung low across his saddle. Even at that distance, Colt recognized the way the man sat, loose in the reins, ready in the shoulders. Bounty riders, the kind who smiled easy when the job paid in blood. Behind him, Sahani gripped the edge of the table for balance. Her face was pale but steady. They come for me, she said quietly. Colt nodded once. You sure? She didn't answer, she didn't have to. He let the shutter fall and crossed to his saddlebag. Inside lay a box of cartridges and a Colt Henry rifle with the bluing long worn off. He checked the rounds, thumbed the lever, and chambered one with a soft click. You can still run, he said. Follow the dry creek west. They'll track the horse, not your feet. I run, they find me again. You fight, they kill you. Colt looked up, his voice low. Then we best make it cost 'em. The first rider reached the foot of the hill just as the last of the sun dropped behind the ridge. The others spread out, one circling left, another right, the fourth hanging back with the horses. Colt counted them, watched how they moved, listened to the easy banter drifting on the wind. He knew that kind of confidence, the kind that only came before a mistake. He blew out the lantern, plunging the cabin into twilight. Stay low, he whispered. Sahani crouched beside the fire pit, the faint orange glow outlining her face. Her hand rested on the small knife Colt had given her. The first shot came sudden, a warning round snapping into the doorframe. Inside! A voice called.
Ain't looking for trouble.
We're looking for a runaway, Apache woman, small, hurt. You seen her? Colt leaned his rifle barrel against the window ledge. Ain't seen nobody fits that talk, he said. Then you won't mind us checking your place. Colt's jaw tightened. I mind, a pause. The crunch of boots on gravel. Then the man's voice again, closer, colder. There's coin for her, cowboy. Ain't worth dying over. Colt sighted down the barrel. That's where you're wrong. He fired once, clean sharping, and the man outside folded without a sound. The others scattered, shouting, gunfire cracking through the dark. Bullets punched splinters from the cabin walls. Colt ducked, reloaded, fired again. One shadow dropped behind a boulder, another circled toward the back. Smoke filled the room, thick and bitter. Sahani pressed herself against the floor, heart pounding, knife clutched tight. When a rider tried to flank the cabin, Colt stepped through the door and fired point blank. The report rolled across the valley like thunder. The last man bolted, firing wild as he spurred his horse into the dark. Colt watched the dust swallow him and didn't bother chasing. Silence fell, heavy, ringing. He lowered the rifle, breath ragged, ears humming. Sahani rose slowly, eyes wide. You kill them. Had to. He checked the chamber, thumbed it empty, and set the rifle on the table. They'd have killed you first. She looked at the bodies below the hill, shadows sprawled against the dying light. In her face was something fierce and sorrowful all at once. Not fear, not relief, but recognition. You saved my life again, she said. Colt poured 2 fingers of whiskey into a cup, handed it to her. Don't make it a habit. She took it, her hand brushing his. You could have let them take me. Could have, he said, sitting down heavy on the step. Didn't sit right. The night settled back in, quiet except for the wind sighing through the sage. The fire inside the cabin burned low, throwing long shadows across the floor. Outside, the coyotes began their mournful song, echoing across the valley of Dust Creek. Colt listened for a while, then said softly, They'll send more when these don't ride back. Sahani's eyes lifted toward the stars peeking through the smoke. Then we must leave. He nodded, already knowing she was right. At first light. The fire had burned down to coals glowing faint in the darkness like a heartbeat that refused to die. Colt Rayner sat by the door, rifle across his knees, listening to the soft rhythm of Sahani's breathing. Outside, the desert wind moved through the mesquite, carrying the dry scent of dust and iron, the smell of blood not yet forgotten. They hadn't spoken much since the gunfight. There hadn't been anything to say. The dead didn't need words, and the living had too many. Sometime near midnight, Sahani stirred, pulling the blanket tighter. You not sleep? Colt shook his head. Sleep's for men who don't owe the world anything. She studied him through the half-light. You think you owe? He nodded toward the bodies buried beneath the sand. Some debts don't wash off easy. Sahani was quiet a long moment. Then she said softly, You saved me 2 times. Maybe that'd pay one. He almost smiled. Wouldn't count on it. Before dawn, Colt saddled the horse. The eastern sky was turning gray-blue, thin light spilling over the horizon. He packed what little they had, water, dried meat, a box of ammunition. Sahani limped to the doorway, hair loose over her shoulders, the desert chill ghosting her breath. Where we go? North, Colt said. There's a canyon there, deep, narrow. If we make it before noon, the sun won't find us. She nodded, her face unreadable, but her hand trembled slightly as she adjusted the reins. You sure you can ride? He asked. I can, she said. I must. He helped her mount, then climbed behind, his arm steady around her as the horse began its climb down the rocky trail. They rode through the gray light, the world silent except for hoofbeats and the rasp of wind against stone. The land was raw, endless, beautiful in its cruelty. Once or twice, Sahani turned her head slightly as if to speak, but the words never came. Finally, Colt broke the silence. When this is over, where'll you go? She thought for a moment. There is no where. My village gone. My brother gone. I walk the wind now. He nodded slowly. Then we walk it together, least till it changes. For the first time since he'd met her, Sahani smiled. Faint, cautious, but real. Maybe you owe less than you think. By midday, they reached the mouth of the canyon, a vast split in the red rock, cool shadows cutting deep into the earth. Colt dismounted, leading the horse into the shade. They drank from a trickle of water seeping between stones, clear and cold. Sahani knelt beside the stream, washing the dust from her hands. You live alone too long, she said quietly. He looked down at her. Not by choice. Yes, she said, by choice. You choose not to feel, Colt frowned. Feeling gets a man killed out here. She turned toward him, eyes steady. No, it'd keep him alive. Her words lingered in the still air. He wanted to argue, but he couldn't. There was something about her, the calm in her voice, the unbroken fire in her eyes, that disarmed every excuse he'd built to survive alone. They rested in silence, the only sound the trickle of water and the distant cry of a hawk circling above. When the wind shifted, Colt tensed. He knew that sound, the faint, rhythmic jingle of tack against saddle. He moved to the canyon's edge and peered out. Far off, rising from the plain, a thin cloud of dust. Riders again, how many? Sahani asked, already reaching for the rifle. Hard to tell, he said, more than before. She stood, face calm. Then this time we not hide. Colt glanced at her, a strange mix of pride and fear tightening his chest. No, he said, checking his weapon. This time we finish it. The sun had just begun to bleed into the canyon rim, painting the stone walls gold and red. They took position among the rocks. Colt crouched low beside her. The riders were closer now, silhouettes moving like shadows across the desert floor. Sahani laid her hand briefly on his arm. You fight for me again? He looked at her and said quietly, No, not just for you. Then he raised his rifle, sighted down the barrel, and waited for the riders to cross into range. The wind fell still, holding its breath with them. The canyon breathed a cold stillness before the coming storm. Wind drifted through the narrow cut of stone, stirring sand into thin spirals. Colt Rayner crouched low behind a ledge, rifle ready, eyes fixed on the distant riders kicking up dust. Beside him, Sahani sat steady, her face calm as the rocks around them. 3 riders. Colt murmured, maybe 4 behind. She nodded once, then asked softly, You afraid? He shook his head. Been afraid plenty of times. Just learned to keep moving anyway. Sahani touched the small amulet hanging at her neck. My brother wear this before he die. He say courage is not what you feel here. She placed her hand on her chest. But what you do here. She tapped the ground beside her heart. Colt smiled faintly. Sounds like he was a smart man. The riders reached the canyon mouth just as the sun began to crest over the horizon, light spilling into the gorge in long, golden shafts. They dismounted, scanning the rocks, voices low. She's here, one called. Tracks lead straight in. Another spat into the dust. Then let's finish this. Colt waited until the first man stepped into the open. He fired once. The echo roared off the canyon walls like thunder. The man fell hard, his gun spinning into the dirt. The others scrambled for cover, bullets ricocheting off stones, sparks flaring like lightning. Colt ducked, reloaded, fired again. Another rider dropped. Sahani lifted the spare rifle and fired too, her shot striking true. The sound of it startled Colt more than the bullet itself. Sharp, certain, fearless. Smoke filled the canyon mouth, hanging in the sunbeams like ghosts. When the gunfire finally stopped, the air was still again, too still. Then came the last rider, stepping out from behind a rock. He was older, meaner looking, wearing a deputy's badge tarnished black with dust. His revolver glinted in the morning light. You just bought yourself a noose, cowboy, he growled. Colt rose from behind cover, rifle empty, and stared at him. Wouldn't be my first. The man raised his gun, and Sahani moved before Colt could. Her shot cracked through the air, striking the man square in the chest. He staggered, fell backward into the sand, still clutching the badge as if it could save him. Silence returned, broken only by the echo of wind down the stone corridors. Colt exhaled slowly, lowering his weapon. His hands trembled from the fight and from something deeper, the sudden realization that he'd made it through another dawn. Sahani leaned her rifle against a rock, breathing hard. You live, she said. He chuckled weakly. Looks that way. You bleed, she added, pointing to his shoulder. He looked down, a crease of blood where a bullet had grazed him. Had worse. She tore a strip from her torn skirt and pressed it against the wound. Not dead yet, she said. He met her gaze, close now, steady and warm. Not dead yet, he repeated. For a long while neither spoke. The sun climbed higher, painting the canyon walls in gold and copper. Then Sahani said softly, What you do now? Colt shrugged. Ain't much left for me down there. He nodded toward the desert. Might ride north, find some place where the ghosts don't know my name. She smiled faintly. Maybe they follow you anyway. He smiled back. Then I hope they like the company. They buried the bodies beneath the canyon ridge, marking the graves with stones. By afternoon, the wind had already begun to erase the tracks. When they rode out together, the land seemed different. Not kinder, but quieter. The sky stretched wide and blue above them, the kind of endless that made a man feel small and free at once. Sahani rode beside him, the sun glinting off her hair. You could leave me now, she said. Colt looked at her, the corners of his mouth lifting. Could, he said, but I won't. Ahead, the canyon opened into a valley alive with morning light. Water glimmered faintly where the rocks split. a small stream cutting through the dust. Colt reined in for a moment, watching it. "Dust Creek," he said quietly. "Never thought I'd see it run again." Sahani followed his gaze. "Maybe the land forgive us today." He nodded, voice soft. "Maybe." They rode on together side by side, leaving the empty desert behind. Two souls who had nothing left to lose and somehow found everything worth keeping. As the sun rose higher over the hills, the wind carried their tracks away, and the story of the stranger from Dust Creek became another whisper in the legend of the West.